Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here. This is Likeable Science. I may not look like Ethan Allen, but I fully appreciate him. And he's to my left. That's the real Ethan Allen.
Thank you, Jay.
And he's a scientist with Prell, and he's the regular host of Likeable Science. Likeable Science, Likeable People. What can I say? And today we're going to talk about technology, that is education technology, and neuroscience, because it's happening. I know it's happening because I heard it on Friday, Science Friday, with Ira Flato.
Yes,
That's how I know it's happening.
And then you know it's happening for sure.
And confirmation, of course, is that Ethan knows about it, and he wants to talk about it today. So he's my guest, and I'm just going to draw it out of him. So the first thing is, up till now, okay, how has education, and therefore, the creation of memory and memory and and thinking processes, how has that worked? How do you build that in someone? How do you educate someone before we get to neuroscience?
Well, I mean, if I knew that, I wouldn't be sitting here, right? I mean, it's a very big question, and it's something we've all, educators have struggled with for centuries, since the earliest times. But in part, education doesn't, of course, come from outside. Education comes from within. Indeed, education is the drawing out of.
That distinguishes mankind and womankind from animal kind.
Well, I don't know.
Maybe not.
I think animals learn pretty much in the same way.
Okay.
They have the innate abilities, and you can draw these out a little bit more.
Are you limiting this to mammals, or is it all animals you're talking about?
No. I spent 6 years training fish, so fish can certainly learn. I've got birds that do multiple tricks and can play poker, play the piano, and ride skateboards and all that kind of stuff. So
okay,
they can clearly learn sort of non-normal things.
Okay, so we have to hold that sort of in reserve on this discussion, because what we find out about people may also apply across the board.
Exactly. But what's really been a big issue going on is that a lot of people have said that the study of the brain, neuroscience, has very little to tell education. And of course, that's sort of paradoxical, because education is all about the brain. It's always been about the brain, and will always be about the brain. It's how your brain works. That's fundamentally lies at the core of education. So neuroscience certainly should be informing education.
But before you get to neuroscience, or before we bring neuroscience into this conversation, and trust me, we will,
okay.
How have people thought that the brain remembers things, learns things, improves its thought process and, database, if you will?
Well,
synapses.
Well, if you're going to talk synapses, you're really talking neuroscience here. I mean, but before people thought about synapses, and all brain was pretty much a black box, and people sort of thought you could sort of stuff into it, and that filled it up, and it then could spew that stuff back out. And that's sort of the factory model of education. Yeah. You get all the students in a room lined up in rows, teachers spew stuff out, and the students all learn it and regurgitate it back. And it works to some extent. You can learn some things that way. It's not a terrible model in some sense, but it's really not optimizing learning, right? It's basically treating all minds like they're the same when everyone is completely unique. It's treating education as a one-way flow of information from the teacher who holds knowledge, filling the students' minds with knowledge, when education is really, as I said, it's a drawing out of the innate knowledge and sort of providing complementary pieces to fill in, and helping students and teachers have a reciprocal relationship.
So education is reciprocal. You can't properly educate yourself. You have to have an engagement. You have to have an interaction. Is that what you're saying?
I think a huge amount of education is basically an interaction between, a two-way interaction, a dynamic between a teacher and a learner. Oftentimes those roles may switch, where the learner suddenly becomes the teacher in some sense. That is, the teacher is now learning something new about their teaching from the learner's reaction.
That's a modern notion, isn't it?
Right, yes.
More modern than ancient.
Yes, yeah. It has traditionally been thought, yes, the teacher holds the knowledge and gives it to the student one way or another, and the student receives that knowledge rather passively.
Okay, so if I have knowledge, if I know, for example, that 2 times 2 is 4, if I know that as a as a matter of data. I mean, I'm not sure it's thought process. It really isn't. It's just 2 times 2 equals 4. I know that. That means that somewhere in my brain, there's a little tiny little, I don't know, thing that remembers that.
Right.
And it has been trained to remember that. It didn't think that through in the first place. I don't think. Somebody told it to remember that, so it does.
Right. And nowadays, the idea is you have kids, for instance, use little manipulative blocks, and they put 2 blocks down and 2 more blocks beside it, and they realize that 2 times 2 is 4. And they can add 2 more blocks, and it's 2 times 3 is 6. And they have a much more visceral understanding of that. It's not just something they memorize, not just the times tables anymore. It's real.
This is really important,
Yeah.
because, I mean, 100 years ago, they told you 2 times 2 is 4.
Right.
Now, they don't necessarily tell you that.
Right.
They tell you how to find out.
They want you to discover it by yourself, basically, because you will probably actually learn it better. Now, there are some things that you're not going to discover on your own. Very few people will sort of stumble upon quantum theory, and so somebody has to sort of tell you that, and so it is a mix. I'm not saying that you can't provide sort of didactic knowledge, but more and more the tendency now is let the student really be an active partner in the learning process.
Somehow it goes parallel to if I give you a fish, you'll eat the fish. If I show you how to fish, you'll have an unlimited supply of fish.
Exactly. So really a lot of teaching is about helping the learner learn how to learn, right? And also inspiring them with sort of a love of learning so they will want to learn more themselves. Because obviously if you teach somebody that, you really don't need to teach them anything else, because then they'll just go and learn it all themselves.
Yeah, that's wonderful. But when you and I grew up, that's not what they did.
Right.
They said 2 and 2 is 4.
Right.
That's what they said.
And you better put that back down on the paper.
You better get that right.
Right,
yeah. So somewhere between the time that you and I were trained, went to school, and now, the whole view of education, that probably means the world view of education. It's not just here, it's everywhere. Excuse me, it spreads, the notion spreads around the world. I mean, if I change my paradigm on educating people in Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's likely to be everywhere, within a generation, I think.
Well, I mean, education, it's very funny. There's a real irony with education. Education is all about change, right? It's about helping people learn and change and grow and develop. But as an institution, as an endeavor, it is incredibly, sort of paradoxically, both hidebound, and we do it this way because we've always done it this way, and or it chases fads and sort of like, oh, this is the hot new topic, we'll jump on this, sort of thoughtlessly. And there doesn't seem a lot of times in education to be that middle ground of saying we'll pursue this new knowledge and this new approach based on this good piece of evidence or these good pieces of evidence.
Would you say, I mean, it's fair, up to our inclusion of neuroscience in this discussion, it's fair to say that right now, 2014, most of the world believes that it's better to be educated in the way that you can figure out what 2 and 2 is than simply be told by rote memory what 2 and 2 is.
I would think most progressive educators anywhere would think that. Yeah. All right.
Okay, but now recently, things have been changing. We have had a lot of educational theory, and some of it, I have to say, I perceive some of it is bunk. But in general, people are more interested in education now than they used to be, because I think they've connected up education with a better society, a better world, a more rational, reasonable society. Reason over passion.
You would hope so. You would think so. If that's the case, why are so many states cutting back on their support of their state universities? And more and more,
they take it for granted. That's why.
Yeah. The states more and more are providing less and less support to universities. They're finding their budgets are cut, and universities are sort of an easy place to cut.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, very short-sighted. They're sort of eating their seed corn, as it were, and failing to invest in what's really going to make the state work in the next generation.
Eating the seed corn. You heard it here on ThinkTech. Thank you for that gift, Ethan.
Classic expression,
I love it. So, but I think there have been a lot of educational theories advanced in our lifetime. We are no longer, truly no longer living in the 19th century.
Right.
People are trying to, find out ways to train people better and thus make a better society, and train kids so that they will be predictably educated in the way we want. If you take a despotic state, a state where there is no democracy and you just want everybody to follow along, then you want them to just remember the data. That's all.
Right.
You don't want a lot of thought process.
Right, exactly. And this gets actually to a real core of what do you want out of your education. Do you want to sort of optimize the individual's own life? Do you want to build a good society? Do you want a set of productive workers for the culture? And those sort of three things lead you on very different educational paths. And we have never, I think, truly had a national conversation that determines which way we go. And so I think we keep sort of bouncing amongst them a little bit in some sense.
But one of the things you said is productive society, and that translates into a productive economy. A better economy means a better life. If I give you a country where everybody is well educated, especially in technology, but other things too, then I'm going to give you a country that can produce more, that can be more comfortable and work less.
Exactly.
So this is really important going forward. Oh, and handle a greater population with less effort. Manage a system with less effort.
If people are educated to think of the culture as being, society as being sort of maybe more important than themselves as an individual, your society may be more cohesive.
Yeah, and you have to do that in an increasing population, or you wind up with tumult.
You would think we would take lessons from the small islands, yes, where that they have done that for generations, because that is the way you survive, yes. And where the Earth is ultimately a small island, right?
Yes. Or a submarine.
Right.
People on submarines are so totally civilized because they have to be.
Right.
They're all bouncing around in that hull. There's not that much space. Yeah. They're nice to each other.
There's nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to go. It's
up
a small
outside.
town. Yes, I think the same rule applies.
Right.
So I think we're learning that education is important, even if we don't fund all the programs we should.
Well, one hopes, and more, I think the world has lower tolerance for despotic regimes that try not to educate their populations or segments of their populations, or try to educate them in a very limited way.
Okay, so take this to 1995.
Okay.
Okay, 95, all of a sudden, Bill Gates recognized it right then. Got the internet. The greatest educational tool ever devised until then. How did that change things?
Well, that was a very interesting point, because suddenly it changed that whole sort of mindset. The mindset before had been knowledge is this sort of valuable commodity that's held by relatively few people and dispensed by them to students. And suddenly, knowledge or information was widely available to anyone who wanted. Just as easily as you can get it. A few clicks of your mouse and you can sort of find out anything you want. And that sort of democratization of knowledge, as it were, or of information, fundamentally, I think, helped us rethink the role of the teacher. And the teacher became not the person who held the knowledge and dispensed it, but rather the person who helped guide students to the knowledge they wanted. And I think that's a healthy trend in that sense. Teachers more as facilitators of students' learning rather than dispensers of knowledge.
Yeah. I went about a year ago to Mid-Pac Institute, and around that time in Mid-Pac Institute, somebody gave them a gift, and they wound up giving iPads to every student, okay, and every teacher. Although I think teachers had to pay for them. And now it changed. That was like a second internet revolution. Because now every kid was in a class with the teacher, and they were sharing the experience of finding knowledge. And just as much as a teacher would teach the kids, it was obvious that the kids were teaching the teacher. It was a collaborative teaching process.
Sure, and particularly with a lot of the current technologies where the kids have had these in their hands and their minds from a very young age, and they have thus learned them in a fundamentally different way than you and I have ever learned technologies. The kids very much can teach, here's the way you do this, here's the workaround for that little problem, zip, zip, and the kids can really teach the teacher and do really teach the teacher, and good teachers embrace that and understand that's going to be the case and are happy to have good teachers.
So you begin wondering, is there much more to this? It's not rote anymore. And, it's not just finding ways to find the data rather than just learn the data by rote. And it's not just the internet, it's collaborative use of the internet. Now we become a community, a global community, using the internet together, teaching. This is something new. But then, that's not even enough right there. Then, neuroscience, wow. And after the break, Ethan, we're going to enter neuroscience on the stage of global education and see what happens. Wow, I can hardly wait. Let's make it a short break. Okay, let's take a break now.
Aloha, my name is Willow Chang Elion, and I host a show called The Art of Life. We air live every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. And what we do is basically we focus on individuals who create a unique sense of place for Hawaii. These are movers and shakers, artists, innovators. They are also traditionalists. They're all involved in the archival process, and they make this place a unique place, one that makes Hawaii a richer place to be. I hope you do join us, and certainly tell your friends about the show, whether they live here or they live abroad. It's a way to give back to our community. We're keeping it pono.
Okay, we're here. This is ThinkTech Hawaii, and we're talking likable science. We're talking about education technology and neuroscience with Ethan Allen of PREL, Pacific Resources, Education and Learning, right here in the Pioneer Plaza. And he's a scientist, so it's always refreshing. So now, we promised you guys that after we came back from the break, we would talk about neuroscience. So I guess the first question for you, Ethan, is what is neuroscience?
Well, neuroscience is fundamentally the study of neurons or the study of the brain. You can look at it either way. And it covers a huge range of fields, from people who study individual neurotransmitters, individual receptors, to people who look at whole animal behavior and everything in between. Neuroscience is not a brand new field, though it's relatively new. It sort of branched out of a variety of fields of psychology and some physiology and some other behavioral sciences. But neuroscience, being fundamentally all about neurons in the brain, should of course always be talking to education and always be informing
education.
Neuron
is a nerve.
Right, exactly.
It's a long nerve.
Well, some of them are very small, but some are very long.
Okay.
Yes. We have individual cells in our bodies that are about 3 feet long, from your spine down to your feet. Anyhow, but neuroscience for a long time really didn't inform much of education, and it was really not until probably about the mid-90s that you finally got a breakthrough with a program called Fast Forward. And Fast Forward happened when some neuroscientists got together with some technologically savvy people and started looking at what's really stopping dyslexic kids from learning. And what they found was that these children were not hearing the so-called fast consonant sounds, which are p, b, k, j. These sounds, which literally, the key part of those sounds are a little 40, 50 millisecond blip, and the kids were missing that and not paying attention to it. And therefore, they're confusing all those sounds, and therefore they're not understanding the language. So these neuroscientists and technology folks built a little computer-based game where those sounds were the critical cues, and then simply using very simple computer technology, stretched those sounds out in time and amped them up in volume and made them huge, big, salient cues. So kids sort of could very easily pick up on them, pay attention to them, and then they'd set the game up, again, with very basic computer technology. So as the kids made right selections and got the little rewards, the sounds got progressively a little bit quieter, a little bit shorter, progressively a little more. And within a matter of a relatively few training sessions, many of these kids were now hearing the sounds in normal speech. And they found that with these kids, literally a few hours of training on this, sometimes the kids would just go on and learn at a perfectly normal rate after that. They were essentially...
Because they trained to be sensitive to these sounds.
They had learned what was critical to listen to, yes.
What a tremendous confirmation to find that true.
Yeah, and it's a powerful program. It's now claims something, it's 3 million kids have used it in 42 countries or something like that. And so...
Is dyslexia finished?
No, it continues, and there's lots of people, unfortunately, who don't sort of realize that at least in some cases, it can be fairly quickly and effectively treated. But so that was really a tremendous sort of breakthrough, and was something, at least in my mind, that said, yes, neuroscience can really impact education in a very clear, direct, and powerful way. And more, I think the two are moving closer together. I think neuroscience is more and more discovering practical applications, or education is more and more discovering practical applications of neuroscience.
But this device, or rather this approach to it for dealing with dyslexia and those plosive sounds, it's not invasive. You don't have to connect anything into my head.
Nope.
You're just taking advantage of what you know about how the brain works.
Exactly. This was not, yes, it didn't involve, sticking electrodes into people's brains and all that kind of stuff that we often think of with neuroscience. It was much more just an understanding about how the auditory system worked, and realizing this particular flaw was what these children had, and there was a relatively simple way, was to teach them to learn that sound, to learn to pay attention to those particular sounds.
So I'm talking about electrical impulses that go through the brain, somehow transmitted.
Right.
I'm talking about chemistry, because chemistry is always involved in the human body.
Right.
I'm talking about, the whole mammalian science of reason versus passion, and because at the end of the day, I don't want to say anything to surprise you or surprise anyone, but we are at the end of the day, we're mammals.
That's right.
And that actually controls us at the end of the day.
Yeah, we cannot get away from our animal nature, right? Absolutely.
But there's another step, another phase here, where we start learning about the interaction of external forces and the brain. For example, sensors that will read what's in the brain. That's fabulous.
Exactly, and so with that, we should actually look at that little video that I brought in, if we can put that on.
Watch this, Ethan. My mind is willing that video play. And this is telekinesis. Whammo! And it plays.
Look at that. I don't know, are we talking over this?
Okay, we can't hear the sound, right?
I guess it would tell you if. So this guy's just thinking about it, wearing a skull cap.
Okay, well, what's happening, Ethan? Can you?
Oh, so this guy sitting there wearing this sort of skull cap kind of device, that has a bunch of electrodes that just are sitting on his scalp. He has taught this quadricopter to fly by thinking different kinds of thoughts, by thinking about opening or closing his left hand or his right hand. He can make the quadricopter go left or right, or raising or lowering his right hand or left hand. He can make it go up or down. And he has practiced for some hours, but relatively short time, a few hours, and developed the ability to think about this and control that quadricopter in three-dimensional space and make it hover, go through hoops, whatever he wants to do. And the point of this really is that for people who are disabled, you can, with that kind of control, they can suddenly do a lot more things around the house. They can turn on lights, turn on the television, get themselves taken care of in a lot of different ways. Anything that you can hook another electromechanical device to, you can teach them different ways to think about it, to operate those devices. And essentially it's reading brainwave activity and looking for certain patterns that are associated with, for instance, opening or closing his right hand. And that is, he earlier sort of taught the quadricopter that means go right, for instance, So it's a very interesting current technology, a little sort of frightening, just in its application, but also very powerful.
Okay, so let's come back and,
Sure.
And just take stock of what we learned from that clip. First of all, although those headgear things showed you a lot of the sensors, you could put that in an ordinary headgear thing. I mean, you would cover it up. It wouldn't look like that. If you wanted it to just be like a stocking over your head,
Sure.
it would look like a stocking over your head, which means that a person could wear it, almost anonymously. You wouldn't know.
That's right.
Necessarily that he was wearing something that read his brainwaves.
Particularly if you were in a place like Seattle, where everyone wears the knit caps pulled down low,
Yeah, right. A lot of cities. Right. The guy's wearing an outfit. It's really a scientific device. That strikes me. The other thing that strikes me from what you said, I think it's really important, is this is a programming business. In other words, you know what the brainwaves are to open the hand. You know that. And so this machine is reading all the brain waves and is looking for that particular brain wave that says open the hand. It's computer.
Pattern, right?
It's looking for a pattern. It knows a lot of patterns, and the brain certainly has lots of patterns. And when it connects, when the software sees this one pattern for open the hand, it may see a lot of things it doesn't understand, but it does understand open the hand. So bingo, the hand opens.
Well, in this case, yes, the quadricopter flies right, or whatever, right?
Whatever
right,
it is.
Yes.
Whatever
but yes,
it is.
If it was a person who was missing an arm, right, their prosthesis would open or close appropriately in that case. Yes.
So it's not, it's really an important thing, I think, and you can explain it further, but it's not that the brain is working on whole cloth here. The machine that's receiving the impulse from the brain through the sock on the head knows what all kinds of things what the brain is saying, and it's selecting those things and acting on those things that it already knows.
Right.
It's not like magic. It's just computer programming.
It is, and it's actually what it really is pattern recognition in a
Yes.
sense, which is fundamental to all human learning, right? That's indeed, you can basically trace from the earliest things we're learning. We're learning about patterns in the world, predictability, order, and that's what that machine is doing. All those 25 sensors are giving 25 different traces, and the computer is able just to keep constant track of those and say when sensor 3 is going up and sensor 7 is going down and sensor 21 is going straight, that means, yes, turn right.
Okay, well, let's talk about that, because the telekinesis thing goes a step further than what I was saying about recognizing patterns. Now, you're going to will your brain to lay out some patterns that actually make the robot, what do you call it? The
Quadricopter in this case.
Yeah, the drone.
Right.
It was a drone. That's
Right.
what we've seen them here on this table.
Right, exactly.
Your brain was going. You personally will the patterns that make that drone go left, right, and up. How does the software know that you're really talking about making the drone go right or left instead of making your hand go right or left?
Well, you have to teach that at an early stage. That is, as you think about opening and closing your right hand, that makes a certain pattern, which is associated with your hand motions. And that pattern, and then you just tell the quadricopter, basically, that pattern means turn right. That pattern of input, when you get that signal from the computer, or if the computer reads that pattern and sends a new signal to the quadricopter that just says to it, activate your right rotor and left rotor, slow down your left rotor, or whatever needs to be done, right?
So if I make this pattern in my brain, I will my hand to go right.
Right.
And the computer sees that as, well, don't forget about hand now. We're talking about the drone. We want the drone to go
translating that, right?
We're translating it into drone language.
Right, exactly.
Okay, but what's happening to my actual hand? Is my hand going right?
No, you just think it. All you have to do is imagine that.
Imagine my hand going right.
Somebody who is.
Can you do that now? Can you
sure.
imagine your hand to go right?
When you do that, when you imagine yourself playing tennis or whatever, you get brainwave patterns very similar to what happens when you actually do that action. Your brain actually runs a program and says, "Oh yeah, I'm doing this now." You're just sort of cutting the actual motor part out.
So
you can sit here and think anything like that and develop patterns in your brain that are very similar to what happened when you actually do that action.
So are you looking at your hand saying, "Oh, my hand is going right"?
You don't have to look at it. You just have to think it. You just have to think about, I'm opening my hand, closing my hand, opening my hand, closing.
Move my hand right.
Right, right.
Without moving your hand right.
Yeah, you can do it with anything. It's completely arbitrary. I mean, you could teach it. Yes, it's when I swing my arm, that makes the thing. Whatever you want to think, you could think about it. Thinking about donuts makes the thing go right, and thinking about cherries makes it go left.
This does suggest to me that you've got to train that person to be able to think
You do.
about looking at his hand going left and right. And
Right, but it's apparently fairly easy. Some people apparently pick up on it really in just a few moments and are able, with a very little training, to start running the quadricopter pretty well through three-dimensional space. Other people, apparently, it takes 10, 15 hours to train them, and some people presume probably.
What about you're trained? Okay, you're trained on this, and you will your hand to go right, or you think your hand, you can imagine your hand going right. That's what it sounds like. Okay, now the drone moves to the right. Okay, but in the middle, okay, of this experience, you forget how to do it, or somebody walks in the door and disturbs and disrupts your thought process, and now you can't imagine the drone or your hand going right. What happens? The drone falls out of the sky, all finished?
I expect they have programmed it when it such that when it doesn't get input, it does something. Hovers and slowly settles to the ground or something. I don't know, but if I were the drone programmer, I would do something like that rather than have it just suddenly be blank and fall out of the sky. Right.
So the old, and this, this I gotta say, this reminds me of Minority Report and Tom Cruise and disembodied brains. It's sort of a pool of warm liquid, and then he can stroke his hand in front of a screen, and the screen is a computer, monitor. It can do anything.
I'll have to go back and look at that movie again. Right.
So parts of this is in there. But I think one thing to clarify is, the old notion of telekinesis is I look at that pen, and I will that pen to go up.
Right. This is not that.
This is not that.
No,
this is
the
not
quadricopter is quite capable. It's got little rotors on it, and it flies. It's a flying machine.
So we haven't figured out how to make the pen go
all
up,
we've figured out is how to control the rotors on the quadricopter, and do that wirelessly, basically. So it's really very, very simple sort of thing.
Yeah.
But in the same way now, and perhaps more relevance, you can now have people functional magnetic resonance imaging, this technology where you see people in these long, big tubes surrounded by very powerful magnets. And they can use that to follow brain activity. You can get people to look at certain objects, say a house, a shoe, a door, and get 15, 20 people to do that in an MRI machine, and it will see a certain types of patterns in each person. House looks like this, door looks like this, shoe looks like this. You can get another person, bring them in, show them a different picture of a shoe or a door or a house, and the MRI machine will identify it correctly. That's what they're looking at, because there's a similarity in the brain activity.
And this ultimately leads to mind control. And right now, I am doing mind control on this whole program, and I am controlling the TriCaster device, and as I wish to go to a break, it will. Watch!
Aloha, my name is Daniel Luke, and this is my co-host, Ing. We'll be here every other Monday on New Media, The Bleeding Edge, on ThinkTech, talking about the intersection of social media and the news. We'll cover technology, trends, and other fun stuff. Did I leave anything out?
Well, I'm here to keep you honest, so that's my job, to remind you of everything you've forgotten and to challenge you at every point.
Excellent. My wife tells me that I'm wrong about quite a lot.
Okay, well, I thought I'd will us to come back, and lo and behold, we came back. Nice work, Ethan. But what you were suggesting is recognition of symbols that are, universal symbols, that you in your brain can recognize something that I send out in my brain. Something like, it's a communication thing of images? What is it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there is that whole end of this business, and we can talk about that sort of separately, of literally communicating directly brain to brain. But what this is basically, we all have, in some sense, similar activities when looking and viewing similar sorts of things. That is, a concept like house, pretty much we all know. You can show different people different kinds of houses, and we'll all sort of say house, or whatever is in our own language. And basically, that's making a certain pattern in your brain, and it's pretty similar, apparently, in everyone's brain. The idea of house apparently more or less tracks in a similar kind of way. It excites similar centers, it depresses other centers, and that way, through that, the computer, again, through watching with a lot of sensors and looking at very huge realms of data, can tell when somebody new is in that machine and seeing a house. Even if it's a different house, looking at a house from a different viewpoint, whatever, there'll be if they think, oh, it's a house, then their brain will develop a pattern similar enough that the machine says, oh, this person's looking at a house.
And we've seen footage
Right.
about what the brain, the technology allows us to look at what the brain is seeing,
Yes.
and it looks like a house. It's not the same exact thing as the house, not like a camera, but you could recognize, arguably, that the brain waves that the computer is reading are a picture of a house.
Right. Even if yes, right. It's a pattern which says house, just as clearly as if you were HOUSE, right? In
So
some
this
sense.
means mind reading.
Yes, and
Because
indeed,
it's more than just graphics. It's
Right.
got to be more than graphics.
yes, and indeed, right. You can do very powerful things with this, and it's going to get to be a technology that's going to be increasingly used and increasingly questioned, because you could put it on to people, put them into an MRI machine, show them footage of a crime scene, and sort of say, do they recognize that? Have they been there before?
Yeah.
And if indeed they show they have been there before, they then can be assumed to be somewhat guilty.
We're gonna put the microphone back on. Let me just will this to happen, and yeah, okay, we'll do it later. Yeah. Well, what I get out of this, Ethan, is so interesting, is when you start seeing into the brain, it suggests that you can also send messages to the brain. And that's really interesting, because then, why do I need to see a movie with my television? Why don't I feed that movie? I put that sock on my head, okay, and now the movie is playing in my brain in actual images that I create that are universal images that may not be photographic images, but they are recognizable by the human brain. More than that, they can be accompanied with other things that are not purely images: sound, smell, emotional reactions that are universal. I can give you a movie you will never forget.
Right.
It'll be like a life experience.
Right.
You'll come out of that movie, whoa, you'll be different.
You have lived through it in some way.
Right. I mean, we're not far from that.
No, they have developed technologies now where essentially, again, you wear more or less a skull cap, and you sit there and you think, and you think, or you actually do say, you raise your left hand. Now there's somebody sitting sort of at the other end of this wearing a skull cap, and basically your messages are getting through to them, and sort of without thinking, they will raise their left hand also, because your pattern that says raise your left hand is being now transmitted into their head, and it's similar enough that it makes that same kind of reaction.
But you're going to a whole step further. You're saying, not only can I give you a movie with all the implications of a movie.
I can give you my interpretation of the movie.
Yeah, but I can actually suggest or even tell you, order you,
Right.
okay,
Yeah.
to do things,
Yeah.
affirmative conduct. And now that's what I call neuroscience.
Yeah, well, I
You
mean,
will remember 2 and 2 is 4.
It gets into very interesting things. How much free will is there? And I don't think it's been well investigated how much people can resist that if they wish.
I think the
They may not be able to stop the thought from coming in, but they might well be able to keep their arm down, even if they sort of want to do. But they may not even. And I don't know. This is quite new stuff. I don't even know if they even know that it's outside thoughts coming on in, right? So if they just view this as their own thoughts, their brain looks at this input and is sort of saying, oh yeah, this is just me working,
Yeah,
how are they to know the
sure.
difference, right?
How do they know?
How do we know we're not being controlled by
Right now,
some external
yeah.
force?
Well, my advice to you, by the way, is if anybody gives you a little stocking cap for your head, don't put it on without knowing what's...
Trust the person first, right?
But then if you take this on a larger, this is out of Dr. No, you take this on a larger basis, let's assume you don't need the stocking cap. let's assume you can do this, you know, in other ways. I don't know what ways. It could be a little small device, who knows what. Now you can control the conduct of everyone around you in larger numbers. You can control. Who knows how powerful this is? We just know that it's a possibility.
It's just starting. I mean, you were talking about the movie earlier and putting the movie directly in your head. So they do have devices now that can be on your glasses that essentially transmit directly into your eye. So yes, you don't have to be watching a television screen out there. You're essentially seeing the movie small, you know, it's just being projected directly onto your retina, fundamentally, you know. So yeah, there's very interesting things, and how these will impact education is truly almost limitless. I mean, right now they use that kind of technology in very interesting ways. For instance, mechanics working on a plane can project a schematic of the part of the jet engine they're working on, and then they're looking at a jet engine. They also are seeing through these glasses the schematic of the jet engine, and they know presumably which tube to take out and which not to mess with, and hopefully they don't make too many mistakes that way.
Yeah.
You can really sort of walk them through in a much faster and more reliable way. So you know, that's already being used in that kind of educational setting.
Well, I mean, it suggests to me something that we think about, and that is that education is really the backbone of the society. If I give you a community that is ill-educated about political science, politics, public policy, I'll give you a community that goes off the side.
Right.
If I give you a community that has no idea about technology, I'll give you a community that really can't keep up,
Right.
and so forth. So really, you know, the backbone of the modern community, well, the community as it exists in this century, is fundamentally a product of education of one kind or another.
Exactly. I think it was old Harvard president Derek Bach who said, "If you think education's expensive, try ignorance."
Oh yeah, you had some other quotes. How about some? We got to hear your other quotes.
Oh, the other one here is that anyone who tries to make a distinction between education and entertainment doesn't know a thing about either one. That was a Marshall McLuhan, very famous Marshall McLuhan quote.
He could really speak to that too.
Yeah, I've collected education quotes over the years and have pages and pages of quotes about education now. It's just
but if you follow the track of saying that education does affect communal, you know, collective conduct, then really, you know, the notion, the Dr. No notion, you know, of affecting large numbers of people and how they think, you know, that's another kind of education.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you look at a country like North Korea and the educational system they have, and what the population thinks and does there, yeah, they've run their education system towards a particular end, you know. I would guess they don't encourage a whole lot of independent thinking and questioning at any level in their education system. I would suspect that's probably quashed fairly quickly at early ages. But we in the U.S., yes, we've sort of taken that to one extreme and have promoted the individual as an entity and allow people and encourage people to think on their own. And it's produced a society that cranks out a lot of innovations, basically, I think it's sort of the right path to do.
But there's an oxymoron there. I mean, we started this conversation talking about how to teach people to think on their own,
right,
to educate themselves. But then we have also revealed the possibility that a third person could come in using neuroscience and control your thinking, control your conduct.
Not quite yet, but
not yet, but it's there in the range of possibility.
Yes,
if you can show him the movie,
right,
if you can read his mind,
right,
well, you know,
put a little bug in his ear, as it were.
Bug in his ear. I mean, it's a little scary. It's more than a little scary.
It is. Yeah, they're like, you know, any technology has that capacity, right, to be used for good or used for bad, and you can bet every technology, you know, has been used each way. That's just sort of part and parcel of technology, I think.
So the likable science part of this is the part that teaches people to be creative, right, innovative, and to respect the common good.
Right, yeah. And much of this, learning about the brain, learning what underlies curiosity, learning how to encourage that, for instance, would be a wonderful thing. How to build up that part of the human brain, as it were, or build up that capacity, stimulate that in individuals. You know?
So that's the part we should focus on.
Yeah,
And we should not focus on trying to do mind control.
exactly.
Well, I hope the people that write the federal grant, checks will keep this in mind. In mind, he said.
There we go. Maybe we can plant a little bug in their ear. So.
Okay, well, we're gonna plant the bug in the mind now that Willow Chang is going to follow. And she's going to be talking about the art of life, and it'll be a million miles away from likable science. But Ethan, it's been great to explore this kind of stuff with you, and I hope we can do it again.
I certainly hope so, Jay. It's been wonderful. I appreciate your stepping in and hosting my show here.
Anytime.
All right, take care.
Aloha.